Hi, thanks for coming along to my talk. So I'm going to be looking at autistic masking, which can be present in the counselling room, something that when helping autistic clients can be quite life-changing for them. I'm a person-centered counsellor, trainer and author, and a PhD student at the University of Chester. Okay, so the aims I'd like to cover today are deciphering masking behaviours, provide an insider's understanding of what it can feel like to receive an autism diagnosis. At this point, when I say insider's understanding, I should share that I am autistic myself. To provide a creative intervention which can be used to support a client who is going through or has gone through an autism diagnosis, and exploring the pluralistic approach for autistic clients. And at the very end, just a little bit about accepting and celebrating autism and neurodivergence. So the creative counselling intervention I'm going to share with you today is creative counselling, basically. Talk therapy alone can be restrictive for autistic people due to social communication challenges, and many autistic people are visual thinkers and will benefit from being presented with abstract concepts in more visual, concrete forms. Executive functioning deficits affect planning, time management, organisation, prioritisation, inhibition, focus, task initiation and persistence, transitions, working memory and attention to detail. So an autistic client in the counselling room is going to be struggling with all these things. So when you're trying to make sense of things, we've got all that to be fighting against. The creative counselling can support executive functioning by providing a more structured approach found to be beneficial to autistic people. So alexithymia affects probably the majority of autistic people. It basically means a lack of word for feelings, emotions, and moods. So when we're in the counselling room, actually, we might kind of have a little bit of a sense of a feeling, but actually finding a word to describe that feeling can be really difficult. And that's another reason why creative counselling can help with that. So it can provide the key to helping autistic clients overcome barriers to counselling, especially as they are often visual learners, using tools including writing, drawing, sand tray, small figure work, and introducing clients' special interests can make a big difference in relaxing them and aiding the therapeutic alliance. So this isn't new. This is something that's been around in the person-centered arena for a while now. Natalie Rogers, Carl Rogers' daughter, as I'm sure you'll know, explains that ancient cultures did not separate arts from healing. And furthermore, the ancient Egyptians encouraged the mentally ill to pursue artistic interests. Almost all art forms have been used since ancient times to prevent distress and remediate internal and external strife. So this is just something that we seem to have lost along the way, that it can really support counselling. It certainly can for autistic people. So I've got a really rubbish joke here, and I apologise if you've been to one of my talks before because I keep recycling this one. What do you get if you cross Carl Rogers with an artist? You get Helen Elliot Rogers, a talented artist, and Carl Rogers' daughter, Natalie Rogers. And Natalie would grow up to create person-centered arts therapy. Natalie Rogers viewed her work in the psychotherapeutic approach as an evolution of her father's person-centered philosophy to include expressive arts. And I think we can identify with a pluralistic approach that it needs, person-centered did need to evolve, and Carl Rogers' own daughter kind of was doing that in her own right. So here's an example of Natalie Rogers' work. She expresses in her artwork how she felt when her father died. She described the imagery as, "In my grief, I felt overwhelmed. Painting the black tidal waves over and over expressed my sense of helplessness." And then we have Frances Fuchs, who is Natalie Rogers' daughter, so Carl Rogers' granddaughter. She is an expressive arts therapist and has used creativity herself. She describes here a creative activity to express her grief on a poignant anniversary for her late spouse, Gail. I went to a special pond that Gail loved and made an altar of stones and special symbols in the sandy shore. I blew smoke in the 4 directions and cast a circle. I gathered a stone for each of the years we were together and placed them one by one in a circle, saying out loud memories of that year, both good and bad, setting the 16th in the center of the circle to represent that part of the year without her. I then threw a crystal heart out as far as I could into the pond. This ritual had a deep healing effect on my sorrow, and I found that a tremendous depression lifted the next day. Okay, so that just was just a quick summary of how creativity has been used in the humanistic approach so far. But I would like us to think about the fully functioning person now. So, and I want to think about this in relation to autistic people, and this may make more sense as we go through. But psychologically healthy persons have been lucky enough to live in contexts that have been conducive to the development of self-concepts, which allow them to be in touch for at least some of the time with their deepest experiences and feelings, without having to censor or distort them, enabling them to move in the direction of becoming a more fully functioning persons. So counselling theory has a lot to say about being our real authentic selves, as you will well know. And looking at the Maslow hierarchy of needs. Now, I know in lockdown, this, as you've probably come across this as well, seemed to speak even more to me of actually being aware of those more basic needs, because everything else had been stripped away. So, sorry, my screen is hiding everything. Okay, so basically, as each of these needs is satisfied, a new set of needs emerges and the organism starts to take for granted the needs which were met previously and almost forget about them. The organism will be dominated by the current need. So the very first one is psychological. Once all that has been met, we can start to think about security, safety, routine, familiarity. And after that's been met and we start taking those two things for granted, we can then look at affection, intimacy, connection to family, friends and colleagues. So looking here at belonging, autistic people quite often might not have had a good sense of belonging in groups around them. So moving on from this section can actually be quite difficult. So next comes esteem, self-esteem and esteem from others, high evaluation of self-achievement. So again, we don't always get a high evaluation of self from others. Struggling society, self-esteem is not something that's always reached very easily for us. And at the very top there, self-actualization, self-fulfillment, actualizing the self's innate potential. We are lucky if we get up here, if we can't work through all of these things. So the desire to become more and more what one is, to become everything that one is capable of being. So this leads on to social identity theory. So this theory recognizes that being part of a group increases opportunities to give and receive help, which result in increased well-being. And a robust support network with good peer relationships provides a significant protective factor for psychosocial well-being. So bullying and lack of acceptance by peers and lack of support from teachers means that autistic people quite often don't have the protective factors to protect their psychosocial well-being. So due to autistic people are likely to have fewer social groups memberships, are less likely to be employed and attend higher education, both rich sources of social groups, and therefore have smaller support networks. Autistic children are known to have challenges with social communication and social interaction. And so it is understandable that they would have less access to these protective factors. At the same time, autistic people face greater stigma because of their diagnosis. meaning, amongst other things, that they experience high levels of bullying and therefore a greater need for social support and the collective self-esteem it can provide. Bullying experiences are very common among autistic children, with victimization rates that are twice as high as those found in the general population. So research by Merry highlights the high occurrence of bullying experienced by autistic children in mainstream schools, attributing these difficulties for autistic children to poor impulse control, emotional and behavioral regulation, sensory overload, and compulsive behaviors, leading them to attracting unwanted attention. So my son Harry, who is autistic, diagnosed at the age of 10, but at a young age, other children would deliberately goad him and seem to enjoy the explosive reaction they could get out of him. He would then usually be the one to get in trouble with the teachers. He would also be very impulsive, getting into trouble without even realizing it. He would often be left wondering as much as us and the teachers why he did certain things. He was just extremely impulsive. He's also always displayed stimming behaviors. These are self-stimulating acts which many autistic individuals use to soothe or communicate intense emotions. And Harry's stims are in the form of random loud noises and animal sounds. So you can imagine how much he would have stood out in a mainstream school making those kind of sounds. Now Hazel, my 9-year-old daughter, is currently undiagnosed, but is on the pathway for diagnosis. And she used to enjoy stimming by flapping her hands. At football practice, I noticed her doing this excitedly. And this flapping like this is quite a common one for autistic people. But as excited as I was that she was displaying something about her emotions that was so natural to her to show it in that way, it was always also tinged with sadness, because I knew that at some point that she'd stop doing that because she would be picked on for doing that. So autistic people, including myself, often have intense interests. However, we often learn to disguise our passion about these, as people can show boredom at us wanting to talk about the same subject so often with such intensity. And as a child, I had hamsters. But I couldn't just have a pet hamster. I had to know everything about hamsters. So I had an encyclopedic knowledge of the small rodents. I could never have a casual interest in anything, but this would often come across as unusual to more neurotypical children. And I learned to mask these differences in order to fit in. So what is masking? To fit in, we learn to mask these differences. Autistic masking can be defined as acting neurotypical or more socially acceptable in order to be accepted by neurotypical peers and society generally. This attempt to fit in involves suppressing all of the autistic traits I've previously highlighted, including stimming. Autistic people will often feel the need to suppress self-stimulating, often repetitive acts, and lose this ability to soothe or communicate these intense emotions. Autistic people will often hide their discomfort and distress in sensorily overwhelming situations, environments, often painting on a smile. I have always struggled with groups and busy places, as I wasn't diagnosed till my late 30s. And I thought it was unusual to not be coping in places that other people would be taking for granted. So as a teenager, trying to keep up with my friends, visiting pubs and clubs, which were incredibly sensory overloading, I would use alcohol as an anchor and get myself into quite dangerous situations. And then later on in life, socializing with other mums at toddler groups was really hard. And I'd find it exhausting and not really know why it was exhausting. So as I did with my knowledge of hamsters as an example, autistic people will often choose to learn not to talk about their own interests. This isn't necessarily a conscious thing. Over time, we receive a message that people really aren't interested in us as we are, and we camouflage to try to fit in. why. To fit in and appear like others around us, to form connections with others for practical reasons like gaining employment, to avoid verbal and physical abuse, to avoid discrimination, and to avoid negative responses from others. Sadly, we are acutely aware, as the research demonstrates, that non-autistic or neurotypical people tend to judge autistic people more negatively. So what are the costs of masking? I do love this image because, you know, you've got the painted on smiley face here, and then this image behind just looks absolutely exhausted. So masking has a detrimental effect on psychological well-being, is exhausting, and can lead to mental and physical health problems, and increased risk of suicide. So I'd like to share this diagram with you. This is a diagram that shows the autistic traits that need to be demonstrated to be diagnosed as autistic. So below, people would have been getting diagnosed. Above, they wouldn't be diagnosed. Now, the reason they wouldn't be diagnosed is likely because they are actually masking a lot of it. But to mask it, the balloon is bigger. It takes a lot more energy. So if we have a look in comparison to E, this person would definitely have been diagnosed, but the balloon is really small because they're not using that energy to mask it, or they can't mask. That may be the difference. So I probably spent a lot of my life in D. So the diagram demonstrates that different autistic people who compensate at varying levels. D would, in many studies, indicate a successful outcome. So the autistic person essentially would be showing less signs of autism and be acting neurotypical. Unfortunately, this level of compensation often delays diagnosis significantly. And as I mentioned before, as is shown by the size of the balloon, for us to act neurotypical takes a large amount of compensation. In other words, a large amount of energy. So studies tend to have definitions of outcome, so a successful definition of outcome imposed by neurotypicals to neurotypical standards, and may not necessarily reflect the best outcomes as perceived by the autistic individuals themselves. Good outcome may occur if the autistic individual appears, at least on the surface, to be experiencing a less impairing version of the condition. So an example that I've come across many times is when eye contact is being looked at in studies. So it would be a successful study if whatever they did to get the person to be able to be happier with, or at least to display they were happy with eye contact, that would be seen as successful. But actually, the autistic person inside would be using a lot of energy to reach that outcome. So from their point of view, that would not be a successful outcome. So successful compensation often leads autistic individuals to not have the support available when things do go wrong, and many misdiagnoses. Most autistic people who have reached adulthood undiagnosed would likely fall into category D. But at any time, if the individual is dealing with big obstacles in life, maybe a job loss, illness, or a relationship breakdown, this balloon can burst and they are unable to hold up to neurotypical standards. And in autistic children who fall into category D, they will keep the balloon afloat whilst at school, but it will come crashing down once they get home, where they feel safe to drop the act. Often parents have a battle to convince the school and paediatricians that the child is struggling and showing traits. It's almost impossible to receive a diagnosis without that school support. So what helps? So us autism advocates are working on changing the way the world treats autistic people, spreading awareness, but most of all acceptance. However, right now, as autistic people living in society, we are a largely misunderstood minority, and there's just no way to escape that fact as society is right now. So as counsellors, there are ways to help change the world for individuals, even if the outside world looks pretty much the same. So how do we do this? So creating a positive autism identity can be the answer to this. A recent study found that society had an effect on the self-esteem of autistic individuals. And although they found that autistic people reported poorer mental health than neurotypical people, it was found that having a positive autism identity, both the individual and collective society, gave a level of protection against depression and anxiety. And the authors highlight the importance of clinicians promoting a positive autism social identity. Larger society may not always be a welcoming place for us autistic people currently. However, the mini society which exists in the counselling room could be the first time and the only time they experience a society which promotes positive autism identity. And this could be the catalyst for them reaching out for more of the same outside of the counselling room, and the start of them having their own personal positive autism identity. Feeling fully welcomed and accepted with a counsellor who shows true interest in them can go a long way to improving their self-esteem and seeing their autism identity positively. I will be sharing these slides, so I know there's a lot of information on this particular slide, but looking at things like the environment, so making sure that that is autism friendly, so there's not lots of loud noises or bright lights or strong scents. That can be really helpful. Providing little sensory toys can kind of communicate to us that we are in an accepting environment. So stimming toys, they're just basically stress toys if you've not come across those before. Recognizing that the relationship can take longer to build because we may find social interactions harder. Communication style, so avoid inferred language, and we tend to prefer more logical, direct communication. And if they dislike talking on the telephone, communicate appointments through text or email. So when you're putting if you put some advertising together, make it clear that you don't have to ring, you could just text or email. There's just many of us that don't like talking on the phone, or are non-verbal as well. Acceptance of interest, so as I've mentioned a couple of times, people might not want to hear about our interests as passionately and as frequently as we might like to discuss them, so it really makes a difference when people do show an interest in that. Flexibility in approach, so this is where we need to work pluralistically to find out how our clients prefer to work best. So many autistic people will have visual strengths, so introducing creative counselling can be helpful. Don't be afraid to adapt your approach. You also might need to ask more questions and give more prompts than you usually would. And the best way to learn about autism is to watch videos, vlogs, that kind of thing, made by autistic people. Like myself, you're going to hear it exactly how it feels from us. And there are so many videos out there that autistic people have produced themselves. My son's one of them, actually, Harry Cromar. If you put Harry Cromar into YouTube, he's got a couple of videos on there. And there's a group called Academy, spelled AU Academy. And they have nothing but autistic speakers coming on. And they actually pay their autistic educators as well. So that's quite nice, because a lot of the time, obviously, we want to do it to spread awareness, but it's nice that they are actually paying and recognizing autistic voices. So the counsellor can provide important support to clients in maintaining healthy relationships outside of the counselling room too, adding to them being able to achieve a positive autism identity. So quite often you'll find when you have an autistic person with a neurotypical person, whether that be a family member or a partner, there can be lots of misunderstandings. So they might not like to go to a certain area because it's sensorily overwhelming, not just because they don't want to go there. And maintaining eye contact, often with children and autistic people, parents and autistic children and teachers and autistic children, they'll be trying to drum in this, look at me when I'm talking to you, I need you to look at me in my eyes to know that you're listening. Quite often we listen better by not looking into people's eyes. So quite often a child, when they're looking away, it's because they're trying to listen. And communication differences, you might have experienced, if you've again had that experience of having an autistic person in the room and a neurotypical person, it's almost like they need a translation service sometimes. So the misunderstandings can come from both sides. And I've just put a book recommendation there called Counselling for Asperger's Couples by Barry Thompson. For anyone who is autistic here, I apologise for using the term Asperger there. This is a term that is now out of date, so we tend not to use it in the community. But I will talk about that a little bit later, but that's just what the book's called. Helping an autistic person look at boundaries, so using a task to understand their boundaries in relationships. So it's quite easy for autistic people to be vulnerable to deceit and manipulation. So that could be a task to help them to stay safe and also become comfortable with saying no. Using non-deficit language can help. If you ever look at autism in the news, quite often you'll see words like risk of autism. In society, it's looked on, in the press especially, quite negatively a lot of the time with the word use. So using positive words, difference rather than deficit can be really helpful. Now, this is an important one. So unhealthy relationships. If you get a sense that a client is in an unhealthy or abusive relationship, you may need to find a way to tell them directly. So going back to a point further on about using direct language and not inference, an autistic person may not always know that they are in an unhealthy or abusive relationship, sadly. So in a safe counselling relationship, that needs to be sometimes a direct conversation about maybe a task on what is a healthy relationship isn't compared to what isn't. Sorry, my screen has got lots of things over it again. So I'd like to introduce now a theory called spoon theory. So autistic people living in a predominantly neurotypical society have what is sometimes termed as a social disability. Being social generally takes more energy for us than it does the average neurotypical person. And learning to manage our energy levels wisely can make a difference to our mental health. Spoon theory was originally developed by Christine, now this is one I can't say very well, Miserandino, I think I got it that time, and it has been widely adopted by the autism community. Introducing this technique to an autistic client could be profoundly beneficial to them. So work pluralistically in collaboration with the client to understand what their wants, needs and goals are. And they may be wanting to unmask their real identity or maybe try to understand why their energy levels are inexplicably low. So 1 spoon equals a bit of energy. And this is possibly 5 spoons for a day's supply. We work out how many spoons we may have for a day. So on a good day, you may have 10 spoons, but on days where we are poorly or having a depressive episode, we may only have 5. Okay, so social tasks and potentially physical tasks requires 1 or more spoons. So bits of energy could be things like bumping into a neighbour on the way out and needing to have a polite chat, needing to socialise in the school playground, popping to the shop and speaking with the cashier, mingling with staff in the staff room at lunchtime, or it might be a sensory issue like hearing somebody chewing during their lunch or sipping loudly on their coffee if that's an issue for the person, performing a workshop, meeting friends at a pub in the evening. So using up more than the available spoons on a regular basis results in autistic burnout. And researchers found that this autistic burnout has a similar effect to depression, but is distinct from it. It often results in the autistic person not functioning socially as well as they normally might, and leads to the need to withdraw. Research has found a correlation between autistic burnout caused by masking and suicidality. Rainmaker et al. Highlight the importance of supporting autistic people not to mask in order to avoid this burnout. They are warned of the potential dangers of teaching autistic people to mask or camouflage their autistic traits. So let me just go back. So findings highlight the need to reduce discrimination and stigma related to autism and disability. So going back to social identity theory, it's collective society that can make this better for the autistic population. So I'm now going to demonstrate a task to help identify autistic traits. Learn how an autistic person could be masking these and the energy it is taking to do so, reflecting on the cost of masking and the importance of unmasking. This is a task I will actually share with you. So I'm going to play a video of me demonstrating the task. Everything that I use, I will make available. Yeah, okay. What you could do whilst you're watching this is, if you have any thoughts about yourself, so it's going to start off with a photo of me as a child and then me as an adult. Maybe think about yourself as a child and yourself as now. And if there's anything that you think was important to you as a child or was a big major part of your identity as a child that you feel the need to mask now. So if that's relevant in any way, have a think whilst I'm playing the video. And please let me know if you can't hear this.
This task I'm going to demonstrate helps to unmask the autistic self. So to get behind as an adult what parts of you might have been masking of the autistic traits. Getting to know these traits can help you manage them more easily. So I find it quite useful to start this task as a child and have a list of the traits nearby. So just a reminder of the traits commonly seen in autism and the traits you would need to be diagnosed as autistic. So social communication and social interaction challenges, repetitive and restrictive behaviour, sensory sensitivity, highly focused or interesting hobbies, extreme anxiety, meltdowns and shutdowns. So I've pre-drawn part of this already to save a little time. As a child, I had sensory sensitivities to listening to people eating or drinking or sniffing any kind of bodily functions, and that would send me into meltdown. I also had a kind of a feeling of being an alien. I didn't fit in very well, and I used mimicking behaviour by copying my best friend as to how other little girls would be, how they would make friends, how they would talk to people. But it was absolutely a mimicked behaviour of that best friend. Sometimes with family that was not close, I would become non-verbal, so anxiety would kick in and I wouldn't be able to find a way to talk to those people who I wasn't close to. I also was highly focused. I had an encyclopedic knowledge of hamsters, which were that was my interesting hobby. I was also able to construct an elaborate rabbit run for my rabbits at the age of 8, which took extreme focus. So moving on to me as an adult, I still very much have sensory issues to listening to people eat or drink. I find this incredibly hard. So let's take an average morning. This is a demonstration of when I used to work in an office a few years ago. So this would be my average day. So core autism trait would be sensory. It was quite hard for me in the mornings to listen to people eating around the breakfast, so that would cost me a spoon. That represents a part of energy. Eating breakfast around the table will cost me a spoon, and I tend to mask that I'm finding that difficult. So on the way to school, I bump into the shopkeeper who's feeling quite chatty this morning. So I need to keep up this mimicking behaviour that I learnt from my best friend. And I have to make sure that I'm smiling at the right time, that my facial expressions appear friendly, and that I'm talking at the right level of conversation for that situation. And I'm not in there for long, so that's relatively easy. So I'm seeing a person in a shop and I am masking or camouflaging, and that's going to cost me a spoon. We get to the playground and we bump into a friend. This is a good friend who I feel like I can be myself with, so I'm not particularly masking here. But any kind of social communication does take some energy. So although I really enjoy time with this friend, it still will cost me a spoon. And then I move on, I get to work, and we have a team meeting. Now this place of work is incredibly stressful for me. There's lots of hustle and bustle, lots of bright lights. Now in this meeting, there's about 5 people sat around the table and they're all chatting amongst themselves. There's lots of talking over each other. That's quite hard for me. Also, my boss isn't particularly nice and I find him very difficult to be myself around, so I'm extremely masking here, as well as battling all the stuff where I need to make sure my facial expressions are doing the right thing, the tone of voice is correct, my body language is correct, I'm maintaining the right amount of eye contact. I'm trying my best to keep my anxiety low, because if I don't, I may become non-verbal still. I still have that. So that's an autism trait. I'm managing a lot of autism traits there, but I'm masking all of them. And that's quite a hard situation for me. So I actually use up 2 spoons in this situation. Now it's lunchtime. There's lots of people chattering and eating in this situation, and I'm finding it extremely hard. So that's my sensory sensitivities. And again, it's a place. The actual place itself is quite bright as well. There's lots of people. I'm finding it extremely hard on my senses. But again, I don't feel comfortable to be myself here. I'm not going to let on. I'm finding all those things hard, so I'm desperately masking that behaviour there. And that costs me 2 spoons. So I'm already getting quite low and it's only lunchtime. I then go back to my everyday job and I receive a complaint on the phone. Now, actually, that's my job. I'm there as a customer service advisor, so dealing with complaints actually feeds into the repetitive behaviour. I can do this quite well because I do it on a regular basis, so it's almost scripted for me. So I'm fairly comfortable dealing with that complaint, more comfortable than I am in the lunchroom. So it is easier. However, I am masking some of my social communication because I'm managing my tone of voice. I'm making sure that I'm not getting too anxious so that I can be at my top processing speed and not losing my verbal ability. So there is some masking going on, and that is going to cost me 1 spoon. Now, I get back to the playground and somebody I don't know all that well is in the playground, but I feel like when I do bump into this person, I don't feel comfortable around them. I feel like they're quite condescending and quite negative towards me, and I'm finding this pretty hard. This person in this playground is not making me feel very comfortable at all. So, along with all the other noise that goes on in a playground, this is going to cost me 2 spoons. Now, I'm not sure if this person is really being negative towards me. It kind of makes me doubt myself, and that insecurity is it me? Is it me getting this wrong? Are they just being sarcastic? Is that just their sense of humour? Or are they really actually not a very nice person? And that's very confusing for me. So as you can see, all of my spoons have been spent, and I still have to go home, and I still have to listen to people eating at tea time. However, I haven't got any spoons left, so I remove myself. I sort everybody else out, but I very discreetly go and eat away from other people, because I can't mask anymore. I haven't got any energy to mask that I'm finding eating uncomfortable. So I go and eat by myself because I've literally run out of spoons. Now it's bedtime, and my little girl confides in me that she's had a difficult situation at school and there's been an incident. Now, as my children are the most important thing to me, I always have a spoon stashed away in my pocket for anything that might come up. It's very important that, as an autistic person, that I do store a little bit of energy away just for that. Now, my friends had wanted me to go out this evening, but I'd used up all my spoons. It's going to be really hard because I wanted to go out with my friends that night, and I'm going to have to let them down again. I mean, I can get quite paranoid that I end up letting my friends down a lot because I end up using my spoons. So I've lost friends along the way because I'm just a little bit unreliable for socialising, because I haven't always got the energy. And I wasn't at this time when I had this job a few years ago. I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't really know how I was running out of my energy. I just knew that I wasn't up to it and I couldn't do it, could not face it. So I pull out of things quite a lot. And as I say, lost friends along the way. So looking back on this now, what could I do differently to conserve some spoons? What we do as autistic people when we really embrace spoon theory is we get to be very, very protective of who gets or who deserves and what deserves our spoons. And that's how we learn our boundaries and how to really take care and look after ourselves. So I really want to be around situations and people as much as possible that I don't have to wear the mask with. So very much find my tribe. So let's just have a look what I could do differently here to take back some spoons. So around the breakfast table, okay, I want to have breakfast in the morning with my children, so that's deserving of a spoon. But maybe I could be a bit more honest about the masking there, maybe with my husband to say I do find it difficult, be a bit more real, but I'm not sure I need to do that with my children. I just want to have a simple breakfast with them. And the chatty shopkeeper. Now this is a personal choice. Other people might feel that they would want to be able to stop and chat to a shopkeeper. However, I think this is not worth a spoon. So the good thing about supermarkets and shops now is that they have a self-service till. So what I do is nowadays I always use the self-service till, and that just preserves a spoon for me. So the next one, speaking to the friend. Well, I really enjoy this friend's company and they mean a lot to me, and they are definitely deserving of that spoon. So I'm going to leave that one there. So the team meeting. This job was toxic. The boss was toxic. I wasn't comfortable with the people around me or the building or the actual job itself. and it was not good for my mental health, and I ended up leaving that job and retraining. Now I know some people might not have the luxury of being able to leave a job like that, but for me, I couldn't, my mental health could not stand that anymore, and I take back those spoons. That is not deserving of my spoons. So with regard to lunchtime, obviously that's going to be the same in most jobs you go to. There'll be situations where you might have to have a congregating type lunch area, but can I choose not to be in that area? Absolutely I can. And I take back those spoons because I never do. And I will either just take myself off for a walk, or I might sit in the car to eat my lunch. So I take back those spoons. They are not worthy of my spoons. Complaint from customer. Well, again, I've moved from this job now, so that's not relevant, but there'll always be something going on in the day-to-day that will take a spoon for that. So I guess that needs to stay there. That's just everyday stuff that you need to deal with. Now this person, this stranger, semi-stranger in the school playground, I don't have to engage with people that are not making me feel comfortable. That's my choice whether I do or not. I could always go and find someone who I can be myself with. So this was absolutely a masking situation. I was not being myself in this. I wasn't being congruent in this. And that person was absolutely not worthy of those 2 spoons. I'm going to take those back. That was my choice to carry on speaking to that person, and I could have avoided it. So there we go. I've clawed back some spoons there. And in this situation, maybe I could have gone out that night with my friends if I'd have done a better job of giving my spoons to situations and people who were deserving of my spoons. And again, coming back to the masking, it's getting to know where you are masking and if you really have to. So if you have people in your life, relationships where you feel you're not being your true self, are they relationships that you should be in, or are they toxic? Should they be walked away from? Can you adjust your social network to include people like this person over here who I don't mask with, and they will be deserving of a spoon, but not too many. There's not 2 spoons there because I'm not masking. So being true to myself without the mask on is what I'm aiming for here. Thank you.
We can't hear you, Lisa.
Hear me now?
Yeah, can you know?
Okay, great. So many people who've received an autism diagnosis, especially in adulthood, have expressed that it felt like a major change, coming out a need to get to know the autistic identity. So many people who have lived with autism all their lives without knowing would have known they were different and not know why, and they'd have become masters at masking their difference in order to fit in. This in itself would have created problems with low self-esteem and low self-worth, with a high degree of failure due to feelings of wrongness and being out of step their whole lives. So although we can effectively mask, we'll often almost get caught out with it, and then there's that embarrassment that goes with that, and that I'm not managing this like everybody else is managing it. So I know I felt when I was coming to terms with my autism identity, almost some pride in looking like everybody else, that I'd managed that I'd achieved that. So I almost had to say goodbye to that, that kind of false self, and let the real one out. So people are likely to have expended a great deal of effort in keeping the true identity well hidden, just like I did. The mask has served its purpose, but removing this mask and letting go of the facade and revealing one's true self will be hugely challenging and overwhelming. So upon diagnosis, as the mask is removed, this fake identity can no longer live. The real identity is revealed. This can leave a person feeling highly vulnerable, open to stigma, rejection, and fear of the unknown. Who is the real self? It's been hidden so long. A new way of being needs to be achieved. It takes a huge amount of courage. Following the diagnosis, no matter how prepared a person may have felt going into it, it's quite possibly going to come across as quite a shock. Obviously, we're all individuals and we all go through that process individually.
Of course, autistic people like myself, we're all complete.
Oh, sorry. I wondered what that voice was then. It's me. Yeah, I just want to show you this image. Cara Crone gave me permission to share this because it really captures it for me. That kind of that time where we're going to be coming out of that mask, but we're on the brink of it and all the feelings that go around that. So the small room, stark and bereft of furniture, depicts a woman who is so deep within her own thoughts that she cannot see the world around her. Shadows darken the corners and the walls seem to tighten around her, shrinking her already tightly enclosed space. Yet there is refuge in this space. There is a grey space, a safe space. No bright colours or unfamiliar objects threaten her here. The lines here are soft, straight and predictable. The woman holds herself protectively, her left arm clutching her right, her feet turning inward, her spine twisted in a soft curve. The room protects her and the curves of her body reflect this inward turning. Even so, a sadness is visible in her stance. Even with her face hidden, we perceive that her shoulders hunch and her head hangs low. The room which protects her also remains colourless, lifeless. That which feels safe also carries a smallness, a darkness, a sadness. She stares out of the window, perceiving a world which carries colour, light, and escape from the smallness. Yet she is not sure how to enter that world, being imprisoned in one of her own creation. She yearns to escape as she stares out, and yet the safety of her own grey space is so appealing. Like the woman, we as viewers are situated as to be pulled into this soft grey space, peering towards a brighter world, and yet finding ourselves obstructed. The question is, are we willing to make the leap? And I'm so glad that I did make that leap. My life is unrecognisably better because of it. So incorporating creative counselling interventions have been shown to enhance most therapeutic modalities, making the more traditional talking therapies more accessible for populations who can find verbal expression challenging, including people affected by trauma, young people, people with learning disabilities and neurodivergent people. Having goals brings clarity associated with the problem being easier to solve or share. Clients found value in breaking down subordinate goals into more manageable tasks. So this masking task can lead the client to wanting to make changes in their lives, to not disguise their real identity, to take control of when they use their spoons. Working pluralistically can provide a client with the opportunity to recognise these goals and break them down into manageable tasks. Visual goal setting for autistic people is beneficial as it can help with planning, often an area of weakness. Paxton and Esty suggest it is appealing as it is a concrete and measurable way to assess progress, and it is specific. So what I would do after completing this masking task, which can take several weeks, I've done it in a bit of a whistle-stop tour, is to kind of take parts of that they want to change, and they may look then at how they make each of those changes. So pluralism allows a counsellor to make to tailor approaches, including the person-centred approach, which I work in, more accessible by allowing the practitioner to draw on other approaches, and in this case, creative counselling, pragmatically and ethically valuing difference and diversity. Autistic people are part of a minority in society, one which is often misunderstood and generally not adapted for within mainstream services, for example, schools, workplace, and other mental health support. Progressive change in society is needed to give autistic people the best life chances. Pluralism links to a wider set of values and practices linked to democracy, social justice and progressive change. And this in the autistic community is exactly what we need to have a better social autism identity. The use of metatherapeutic communication supports clients to communicate their preferences, wants and goals in a way which is more structured and concrete, which is more suitable to many autistic people. So the neurodiversity paradigm, this encourages acceptance of autistic people and other neurodivergent people and their traits, rather than trying to alter them to fit better into society, and appreciates the damage caused by hiding and masking the autistic self, evolving autism from being viewed as a medical disability to a social movement. A paradigm shift occurs. So neurodiversity, the neurodiversity movement is a paradigm shift. And this occurs when there are too many anomalies with an existing paradigm. In other words, the normal science, the normal way of doing things. A new way of doing things starts to emerge, but a paradigm shift does not happen overnight, and it usually cannot be claimed by just one person. As the new paradigm is evolving, so comes a new set of problems for pioneers to resolve, along with a new language. You may remember I mentioned the word Asperger before. The neurodiversity paradigm is in its infancy, and the language is evolving almost constantly. But with this comes discourse. Some people who were diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome still identify with the term, but many people in the autistic community find the term offensive. High and low functioning autism are terms used regularly, but some autistic people find these terms hurtful and inaccurate. So going back to the chart I showed you about compensation, actually, I can, if you're going to use these terms, I can appear most of the time to be high functioning. But if something drastic happens in my life and my bubble bursts, I can then become low functioning. But I wouldn't have the support networks in place because I would be deemed high functioning. So it can be very unhelpful in both ways. Some parents are supportive of therapies like ABA, and this is applied behavioural analysis, and will argue the case for seeking the therapy to support their children. But many autistic adults, many of whom have had negative experience of it as a child, are vehemently against it. Some people use the term person with autism, but the majority of autistic people have expressed the preference to use autistic person, as they are proud to be so, and I argue that is as much part of them as their gender or their race, for example. And some people do not like the term spectrum at all. So there's lots going on there. There's lots of politics in the autism community. The first pioneer of the movement, Judy Singer, is saying that we are all neurodiverse. Autistic people would now be known as neurodivergent. So you may have become used to using the word neurodiverse to describe an autistic person. Actually, that describes everybody. Non-autistic people are the neuro majority, autistic people are the neuro minority, but we are all neurodiverse. So another word that's been conceptualized is neurodivergent to describe autistic people. So this is a natural part of a paradigm shift as it develops. However, for a newly diagnosed autistic person, it can be a minefield as they learn this new language, and they can be met with judgment in the autism community if they use the wrong terms. And this can be problematic as they are trying to enter their new tribe. People are likely to have many conditions of worth anyway, growing up with undiagnosed autism. And for parents of autistic children, they can be attacked for expressing how hard it might be if they're finding behavioural issues to be a big factor, something as a mum of autistic children I can definitely identify with. And this is a Facebook group that I helped form, counsellors working with neurodivergence. I'm not active on there at the moment because I burnt out. So as I've mentioned, I used up too many spoons. And so I'm having a little bit of a break from social media in general. But it's still a fantastic group, and I would recommend people joining that group. And thank you for listening. I can take questions now.
Great, Lisa, thank you.
I'm sorry, I realise I've come right up to the time there, not left any time for questions. Hang on, let me stop my presentation. Why is it not letting me stop sharing it?
It looks like it's stopped shared now from here. I don't know if everyone
Can you
else
not hear that noise?
No, it's maybe playing on your computer.
Okay,
still.
oh, it's just me then. Right, okay, I've got rid of mine now. Hi.
Great. But thank you, Lisa. Thank you for your
Welcome.
time. And yeah, I'm here to support. So if anyone needs some help, but the room will be open for another 15 or so minutes. I don't know if you're happy to stay here for
Yes.
questions. Or...
I am, yeah. As long as other people are, I can answer some questions.
Yeah. Can see if there's.
Oops.
Yeah, listen.
Hi.
Hi.
I just found that fantastic. I work in, I'm a school-based counsellor in Scotland, and I'm seeing more and more neurodivergent children. And there isn't the capacity within school to support all of them the way that they need to be supported.
Absolutely.
Or and it's usually my room where the breakdown or the meltdowns, the burnout happens. And it's because they're expecting so much from, it's like all of their spoons are gone, just actually getting in the building. Very familiar with the spoon, we use it for chronic pain. So I'm very aware of the spoon terminology, and it's ones that I've used. However, the thing I want to bring up, and I don't know if anyone else has experience of it, but I'm not allowed to mention in the room if I see autistic traits and characteristics.
Yeah.
But if I miss a bruise, heaven help me.
Yeah.
And this is where I am really working. It's really rubbing me right now, because I have 4 girls who I would say are autistic. They are easier. It's easier for them to identify as transgender and to get their mum and dad's woohoo, go girl.
Wow.
Than to get any kind of talk of autism.
Oh, that's so sad.
And one of them is now in the process of waiting to be diagnosed as autistic. And because she brought it into the room, I was able then to share my experience of her and maybe why. And she said to me, why did nobody tell me? And so it's almost like for the years that I've been there, I've played their game. I've stuck to their rules. I haven't liked it, but I've done it. But now I'm getting firsthand, why did nobody point this out to me? Because as she said, it might have been able to explain a lot about my behaviour. I might have been able to get support from other areas. And it is actually something that I'm going to take up with Ed Psych in my region in Scotland as to why can't I do this? This isn't a teacher saying, this is a professional actually saying, you know what? And it's something that the teachers are all aware of, but there's just something that they aren't allowed to bring the conversation up.
No, it's awful. And this is just so common. I mean, as an autistic person diagnosed at 37, I would be so cross if I found out that, I mean, I've seen various counsellors, obviously throughout 37 years of life, I've come across lots of different professionals. If I knew that a few of them had kind of suspected it and not told, what a power imbalance that is.
It's my transparency as a counsellor.
Oh, absolutely. I know it's a difficult conversation and one that needs a lot of careful consideration and talking with supervision, but I have quite a few times brought it into the counselling room. And I do try and word it in a way, because they might start saying, my autistic friend this, or, there might be an obvious opening for something like that, but there's not always. but it makes such a huge difference, because then you can tell them about why they're using this energy. So like spoon theory, you know, that's why the autism community have embraced that so much, because we all sort of knew that we were expelling this energy that other people didn't seem to. But it explains it so well and helps us to with self-care so much better, and because it's so visual, that really helps. But how can you impart that knowledge if you're not allowed to? I mean, I guess you could use it for something else, but not in the way that it's done with autism.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's absolutely awful. And you know, I've got children that are 3 children, 2 diagnosed, 1 going through the process. I'm pretty sure that I know for a fact that my daughter has had teachers think autism and they haven't told me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's really tricky.
It is, but I think there's just such a blanket between or such a barrier, and it's like, if part and parcel of what I tell the kids at school is that there should be no difference between your mental health and your physical health. They're equally important. And I just think there's just such a blatant discrimination.
It is, and it comes down to that social identity. Autism has got a negative social identity, so people think it's an insult to say, I think you might be autistic. You think you're going to be insulting them. That's what we need to move away from. That's why this social identity theory really needs to be promoted, and why I'm so keen in the counselling room to make sure that we are embracing it in a positive way with our language, with actually just knowing about it, so that we can help in a way, that autistic people can access.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I just wanted to share my experience, and sometimes I feel as though my hands are tied.
Yeah, I completely see why. Thank you for sharing that.
Thanks.
I have a question. Is that okay?
Hi, Ivan.
Hi, my name is Ivan. I think what I'm interested in is probably exploring a little bit more around kind of the minefield, the politics about when it comes to autism. I think you kind of mentioned it a little bit about how there's a lot of division between, like, people who want to be called Asperger's, some people that don't, some people who feel like the person comes first, then the condition, or the condition first, then the person. Then ABA always comes up in my understanding of talking in autism. I've worked 12 years in ABA. I have all my friends work in that field. They worked in huge companies in the United States that have amazing results. And I find that it's a bit difficult to bring the positive aspects of ABA into this world, and to kind of have, because that kind of language isn't happening in the States. It does, in my opinion, it does in some communities. I think in Australia, in Canada, there's more acceptance of exploring these kind of options and getting away from the political, like, us versus them. But for me, it's just, because I've had such a positive experience with it, that it's hard to hear that, because for me, it's like, oh, that's really hard. It's really sad. It just makes me extremely sad that we can't somehow, like, that always comes up, and it's never like, how can we integrate the good things from all camps? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And it is certainly in this country a real hot potato, ABA in the community, and it's kind of a lot of the kind of social media groups will have rules and out bans of even mentioning the word. So in this country, it's a really sensitive topic, and partly it's because people are sharing stories on social media of kind of maybe having it in earlier times and kind of experiencing PTSD and trauma from it. And those are the stories and the experiences that are the ones that are the loudest in the social media of the autism community. And comparisons of I've completely forgotten what the word is, conversion therapy, because they came from the same place. It might be that now it's very much moved away from that place. And I don't know, because to be honest with you, I am not an ABA specialists. So
Yeah.
I can only talk about what, as an autistic person, what's going on in the autism community, and only in this country, really. And I know there is a big difference between these two conversations in America and in this country, and a lot of the terminology could be quite different as well. So person with autism, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Ivan, is kind of more accepted in America than it is here.
Sure.
Yeah, there are some quite big differences in the two communities here and there.
Yeah.
It's huge. It's such a huge topic.
I just think, for me, I think what people don't understand is that the governing body for ABA pretty much is just establishing. They've basically stopped everyone from getting hours or practicing ABA all around the world, because now they want individual countries to start developing a governing body that does it right. And when ABA started in the UK, it was people with speech therapy, people from other countries saying they had degrees. It was the wild, wild west. It was just random people picking up techniques and applying it with children.
Absolutely.
And I think what happened is that the ABA community, and now that there's a lot of people who work with love and care and understanding and are willing to kind of change that kind of conversation, it's kind of in the process. And I think that doesn't get out into the community, that, you know, it's like now there's going to be a governing body where you can go to a UK ABA, you know, like the BACP, where you'll say, hey, listen, do you have people who have done hours, who are certified, who've been supervised? And I think that change is happening. But again, from my experience of working with adults and children in the spectrum, it's, you know, like, it's been very positive. It's been loving, it's been caring, but it almost seems that because things haven't been regulated here, it's caused a really huge uproar. And I think some people did hurt people, but I would say investigate those people's degrees. Investigate their trainings, because it's like saying, well, all ABA people is that way. And to me, it's like, oh, that's really tough to see, because there is so much good being done with ABA, with ACT therapy. And it's pretty much, you know, like in the States, if you get diagnosed, insurance will cover that. Insurance will cover all your ABA, which is fantastic. Like it took a long time for the ABA, for the autistic community to get together and get insurances to accept ABA as a form of help and support for kids. And then you get the power to choose a practitioner. And much like psychotherapists, all ABA therapists are not the same. They're not all, you know, they're not all, you know, you can't say they're all good and they're all bad. You know, you have to find the one that works for you.
Ivan, thank you for sharing the, you know, the other side of the story, as it were. It's, you know, quite often it is only one-sided. So it's always good to hear the kind of fors and against things rather than just blanket, you know. I think what from my point of view, as long as we're not getting the autism out of the person and we accept that they are worthwhile just as they are, then you know, I'll support anything that helps an autistic person, as long as it's about them, not what other people want to put on them as expectations. So going back to, you know, person-centered theory of the actualization theory, it's that they are their true selves.
Sure.
As long as support is doing that, that's
and
all I would ask.
Most ABA is individually made with the parent's idea. Like, it's like, this is what we want from our child. This is what we expect in our family. And it's usually custom made, in my opinion. It's never like, oh, the practitioner says, this is what's got to. So I think it varies from practitioner to practitioner.
Yeah.
But again, my experience has been, you know, I wonder what it'd be like to talk to adults who've had ABA, who've had a positive experience. What was positive for them?
Yeah, and absolutely, I would be more interested in hearing from the autistic adult than say the parent, just because, you know, a parent might have different wants to as well. You know, that's I want to hear from autistic adults as to how they experienced it. Absolutely,
I would agree on that.
Yeah. Thank you, Ivan.
Thanks.
Is that up to time? You want to take a break before we go into the next part?
Yeah.
No, that was great, Lisa. Thank you. And
you,
thanks
Sandra.
for Thanks for this. Yeah, taking part, everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
thanks
good to
very
be in
much.
here. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for being here.